One of the great things about classical music is that it has been around for hundreds of years, and over the course of those hundreds of years, it has changed and morphed. Changes that over time we've grouped into 5 or so distinct periods of music. Now, most composers fit their period, but there are a few who don't, and I've collected 5 famous names who are not representative of their age. So let's dive straight in, starting with one of the biggest names of all. You wouldn't immediately think of Beethoven as not belonging to his age, but he doesn't. He really doesn't. If you think he does, try listening to any of his contemporaries, who frankly all sound like Mozart. In fact, even those who came immediately after him, like Schubert or Schumann, they don't go near trying to do what Beethoven did with things like the symphony. Beethoven is a classical composer, yes, but he really is the first romantic composer as well. He made his music more expressive, more emotional, more direct. He also made it louder and longer, and he pushed harmonic expression beyond anything his contemporaries were doing. But his music is so revolutionary and new that his late compositions would only make sense years after his death, which means he merits top billing on a list like this. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for Beethoven. Next up comes a composer who was alive at the same time as Beethoven, but is on this list for a different reason. Not sounding like the future, but sounding like the past. Mendelssohn is a composer who should fit snugly into the Romantic period. He had just turned 18 when Beethoven died and was a contemporary of Liszt and Chopin. He also did lots of romantic-y things, like composing symphonies in minor keys or writing music about turbulent boat rides. But Mendelssohn is also in many ways a distinctly classical composer. Unlike Liszt or Chopin, he wrote mostly in traditional forms like the symphony or the string quartet. He was intellectually more of a classicist as well, adhering to international universalist Enlightenment values. Well, I mean, his granddad was Moses Mendelssohn, the great Jewish Enlightenment philosopher. Likewise, emotionally, there is more restraint, control and precision in his music, and less of the passion we'll get from a Tchaikovsky or a Wagner. And most of all, there's the music itself. Mendelssohn is, for me, the only composer who gets close to Mozart's charming precision, and when he does, he really does sound more like a classical composer than a romantic one, in my honest opinion. Which is even more the case with my third composer. Saint-Saëns was 12 when Mendelssohn died and composed up to his own death in 1921. That meant he could have been a romantic, a late romantic, even a modernist. And yet, he isn't quite any of those things. His focus was always aimed at classical virtues such as clarity and precision, rather than gut-wrenching emotionality. As he himself said, "What interests me in music is its purely musical side, its architecture as it were. The rest, the emotional side, has been overdone since Wagner." There's something so old-fashioned about his philosophy of music. In art, everything must be aesthetic. That is, everything must correspond to a need for order and beauty. I'm sure Mozart would have agreed, but these are very old-fashioned sensibilities to take us into the 20th century. So, you've probably realised there's 2 ways to get on this list. The first, by far more common way, is to be old-fashioned like good old Saint-Saëns. The second, far harder route, is to sound like the future, to make music like Beethoven that manages to sound like music that's going to be composed in the future. And my next composer, I think, manages that. Modest Mussorgsky is a fascinating composer who produced work that had a raw power and intensity that contemporaries at the time thought crude, flawed and unpolished. Now, that work actually sounds ahead of the curve. Sections like this from his opera Boris Godunov feels exactly like the music minimalist composers like Philip Glass would produce more than 100 years later. Mussorgsky is a fascinating case, a man destroyed by alcoholism who left much of his work incomplete, but his raw, rhythmically inspired energy could really sound like it belonged in a future age. My final out-of-time composer is another Russian. Can you guess who? Anyone? Rachmaninoff feels like he belongs in his musical context, but he doesn't. He composed pretty much all in the 20th century, and yet his music is clearly romantic. He's not even that much of a late romantic. There's some modern tonalities and bits, but basically Rachmaninoff is a traditional romantic, which does no harm to his work at all. And by the way, I'd like to add an honourable mention here. Firstly, a nod to Sibelius, who was seen in his day by many as a very modern composer, but when you really listen to his music, he's a late romantic. And I'd just like to finish with a hypothetical. Robert Schumann went mad years before his death. I've made a video about this, so do check it out, but what is fascinating is that Schumann continued to compose up to his death, music that became stranger and stranger. After his death, Schumann's wife Clara and their friend Johann Brahms went through Schumann's work and threw almost all of it away, no doubt shamed by what they considered the work of a madman. However, me in the 21st century, I'm always fascinated what it would be like to have those musical fragments now. Perhaps, in his insanity, Schumann was also reaching for music of the future. However, we'll never know. The work was destroyed, so I'll let it rest there. I hope you liked the video. Please like and subscribe.